Good to see you in the house, Lord. We're going to go ahead and receive our Sunday school class offering. So let me have that Esther blessing over the offering for us.
Let us pray. Dear most gracious Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for this chance to be back in the house, Lord God. God, as we prepare this time, God, we're fixing to break the bread of life here, Lord God. I ask you to anoint the teaching and today, God, I ask you to anoint the singing here, Lord God. And I ask you to anoint the preaching here, Lord God, here today, God. God, I ask, Lord, if there anyone be here new to this house today lost, dear Lord God, we pray today that they know you as personal Lord and Savior, dear God. God, as we take this offering, dear Lord God, we ask you to bless it, dear Lord God, to advance your kingdom, dear Lord God, that we can fill this Sunday school class up, dear Lord. God, we just thank you, we love you, God, and we're going to give you all the praise and all the glory in everything we do. In Jesus' name we pray.
It is good to be in the house of the Lord this morning. My mic turned on, everything good? I think I got it on right. It is good to see you here. Appreciate you being here. We're going to continue our journey through the final week of Jesus' life. You know, it's been a right good while now. I could count back how many weeks. I don't know. We've been on the last week of his life for really a few months now, really. It's just so much. And listen, we ain't scratched the surface of what's there. I mean, I've been through it kind of in a simple as way as I know how. And just trying to share with you the things that Jesus went through, and this everything he went through for you and I. I mean, everything, and we're going to continue that day, everything we see, I mean, everything he did, for my benefit and your benefit, to give us a right relationship with Jesus Christ. I mean, that was his whole purpose of coming. And nothing new that you're going to hear here today, but I told you that 2 weeks ago that we talked about some of the things Jesus said on the cross. And we'll do that. We'll have to turn a few different places to get that, what Jesus did on the cross. And listen here, I'm not telling you everything I'm going to tell you is exactly in the order it was, but it was the best I could tell. Now, I'm not telling you that's 100% right. You know, I don't think there's nobody that can come up of a surety and say, I just know that he said those things. Now, you know, probably the first thing we're going to say is probably the first thing he said, and definitely the last thing he says, we kind of know that. We kind of know those types of things, anyway, let's start in Matthew 27:33, and we're going to use mostly John and a few Matthew scriptures and some Luke and John. But let's get him right there to the cross. You know, we've always when Jesus got to the cross, we know there was three of them hanging there, and we know one of them believed. But you know, in the beginning, and it's just another picture of how you got to realize you're lost before you can be saved. There was two thieves on the cross, and we know that we always preach when one of them asked for forgiveness, and that's a true statement. But when they were first hung on the cross, neither one of the thieves believed in Jesus. You say, we can't get that. I'm going to show you right here in the Bible where it says they both. Right. Just to begin with. It's just a picture of how they were both lost. And you got to realize that you're lost and somebody paid a price for you. That's all I'm trying to say with that statement. And there was a time. Now, what happened to make that thief change? Pick your event, because there's so much that took place on that day. Is the things going to work today, or are we going to turn into Matthew 27? Matthew 27:33. I might not have said that. I was just thinking I did. I might not have. All right, so Jesus is being condemned to die. You know, you remember the story up to this point. If we don't move on, we won't get through. He's carried, and it says, and when they were coming to a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of the skull. Now, I've had the opportunity to go here on 3 occasions and stand on this area where they call Golgotha. And if you've seen pictures, those of you, but y'all been to the mountains. I mean, everybody here's seen mountains, been to the mountains. Well, there's a place in the mountain that kind of looks like the shape of a man's skull with the eyes sunken in, and it just similar to that. And that this year they done that here, but anywhere that they done these crucifixions, they look for a similar place. Now, there's some things I can't prove biblically, but they sound good. But it's believed when David killed Goliath that he buried his head in this area. It's believed that. I can't prove that to be a fact. Makes sense to me. You can't believe everything you read. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm one that, and if I can prove it biblically or if it fits biblically, I'm for it. It fits, but I can't prove it. But it's an interesting theory. Supposedly, there's been a skull found there in the last so many years that was the size of what they believe Goliath to be, like a third something bigger than the average man's head. Anyway, just saying that. There's two more things that's interesting, but I can't prove them, and then we're going to move on. It's believed that Adam is buried there. There was a tomb. There was under this mountain. Supposedly there's been a place found where Adam was buried. It would fit. I mean, that would be like God to do something. Everything God does, it's got purpose. I mean, we could talk all day on things that God does. He's got a purpose for it. I mean, the first man, Jesus coming. I mean, Goliath was representing all that. Our enemies, all that fits. But they also claim in this same area with Golgotha, in this tomb-like area that I'm talking about, or in the mountain, like a huge-out place in the mountain, was where the Ark of the Covenant was last seen with its mercy seat. And if you understand the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat, I shouldn't have to say much anything else, but they said when the earthquake come, it opened up the ground, and the blood was able to come, and the final blood was offered on the mercy seat of God. All that sounds very interesting, but can't prove none of it. Not one thing. But all three are interesting to me. Just thought I'd share that with you. But there's a place called God. It's a place of the skull. Looks like the skull of a man imprinted in the mountain. If you hadn't ever looked at it when you get home, the only thing you got to do is just look it up online. There's pictures everywhere that you can find. You'll see you can see it even in the pictures, but it's more real looking in person than it is with a picture. But still, you can get the idea. But they took Jesus to this place to crucify him. He had power to come down off that cross. He had power not to go to the cross. He had power to never get this far with what he done, but he suffered for you and I. He had power to stop those the beatings, and we talked about 2 weeks ago. He had the power to stop being beaten with a calf of 9 tails or whatever, but he took all the suffering for you. And for me, listen, church, I don't believe sometimes we realize the price that Jesus truly paid for us on the cross of Calvary. Me included, sometimes I think about how much I fall short for a man that's done so much for me, for a Savior. I say a man, a Savior that's done so much for me. And I fall so short. A lot of times I want to do what I want to do. We can all say amen right there at times in our life. There are times, when it comes to choice, hey, am I going to do this? I'm going to do this. Whichever one you want to do usually wins. But Jesus paid a great price. Now, let's read a little bit further, then we'll move on. For 34. They gave him vinegar to drink, mingled with gall, and when he had tasted thereof, he would not drink. 35. I want to get now to another verse about the thieves, and I'll move on. And they crucified him and parted his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which spoken by the prophet. They parted my garments, and among them and upon my vesture they did cast lots. So they parted his garments, some of his clothes. They cut it in 4 parts. There had been 4 soldiers that would take a part in this, and each took a part. But when it comes to his coat, it was woven from top to bottom. It was seamless, more or less is what it's saying. And they cast lots, and more or less see who would get it out of the 4. And that's not sort of like rolling a dice with colors. It's more or less what casting lots. I won't get into that, but more or less is what that is. And the one that called the right one got the garment. Verse 36. And sitting down, they watched him there. Keep going. And said over his head this accusation written, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Now this place that he was, in those days would have been the main road coming in and out of town. In other words, it'd be like being on Main Street, I mean, you know, in a town, where it was a place where people would come and go day in and day out. That's another reason they did it in there, because it's so public. I mean, you can believe anything however you want to, but in my thinking, when Jesus was crucified, he was stripped naked completely. You don't have to see it that way. That's just what I believe. I mean, there's nothing, church, we can face in this life that he didn't face. I mean, I know we've all been shamed for this or that maybe in our walk, but he's faced all that. And the first 3 hours, now he was on the cross, we know, they would put him on the cross around 9 o'clock in the morning, and he would have hung there till roughly 3 o'clock in the afternoon when he died. And the first 3 hours were daylight, from what we read in the Bible. But from 12 o'clock to 3, it became complete darkness. And we'll see that in the scriptures as we go. But in the first 3 hours, it was written right over the top of him. They'd always put your accusation over him. And it says, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. And he weren't just the King of the Jews, he's going to be King of the world, or is King of the world. Verse 38. And then were there 2 thieves crucified with him, one on the right hand and another on the left. Keep going. And they that passed by reviled him and wagging their heads. I mean, people was walking by. I mean, seemed like people moving in that part of the country is more harsh, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but just more outspoken with things, maybe than what we are here in America. And maybe we bad here, but not quite like they are there. But next verse, but people would walk by and they would talk about it right out loud, saying, thou destroyest the temple. In other words, they would saying things out loud they'd heard him say. Buildest it in 3 days, save thyself. If thou be Son of God, come down from the cross. Verse 41. Likewise also the chief priests mocking, and the scribes and the elders. I mean, all the religious leaders were walking. They were just in front of the cross. They would just, I would hate to know I had to sit there with a man that I didn't know anything about and watch him suffer. I just couldn't see me enjoying that. But you got to realize they was in a culture of time that would turn men loose in big cages with big crowds and let wild animals just come in. They got a thrill, just like you'd go to a car race or a ball game. They got as much joy out of that as you would a ball game. That just gives you an idea, is what I'm trying to say. I mean, just be just like going tomorrow night and watching a man be tore apart by a wild animal or crucified. I mean, that was just their lives. Just like you go to ball games. Verse 42. And they were saying these things out loud. He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He could have come down from the cross, and they would have believed him. But he'd have never paid the price that it was going to take to pay for my sin and your sin. And it was either have a few people, religious leaders, believe in you, or in time have the world believe in you. And I'm so glad that Jesus chose to hang on. And listen, nobody took his life from him. There's not enough people in this earth to take his life. You can see it any way you want to. It's just impossible. He said he'd lay it down. He said, if I lay it down, I will take it up again. I'm so thankful that he took it back up for me and for you. There was only one way to get the sin debt paid. Just one way. Just one. God chose. You know, it would be a lot easier. And people think different. I understand. You know, I've had people say, well, why, God sent his son. Why didn't he lay down his life? It'd be a whole lot easier for me to lay down my life than pick out one of my children and lay down my life for you. Now, I'm not telling you I want to do either one. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just telling you if I had a choice, and it was between me or my son, it would be me. That's not a choice. That's just you say, well, you just saying that. No, I mean it. It just shows how much more God loved you that he was willing to lay down. That's all I'm trying to say. It just shows. And listen, if you've got children, you've got to feel the same way. It just shows you the love that God had. Why he loved me so much, I don't know. But while I was yet a sinner, Christ died for me. While I was yet a sinner, he hung on the cross of Calvary, stripped of everything, beaten. In the Old Testament, and I'm getting there, I'm trying, I promise. In the Old Testament, the priests, when they would go into that mercy seat I mentioned just a minute ago, they would sprinkle with blood. Anybody remember how many times? 7. They were sprinkled him 7 times. Jesus would shed blood out of 7 areas of his body. The crown of thorns on his head, both hands, both feet, beaten in his back, and in the last in the front with a spear was in his side. Now, in the Old Testament, God looked down at Adam and said it weren't good for man to be alone, and he opened his side. You remember that in the first Adam, he opened his side and he took a rib from Adam. And when he took a rib from Adam, Adam's bride or his wife was born, or his bride. But when Jesus shed that blood on the cross of Calvary, the last thing they done was poked him in that side with that spear. And the blood and the water that was left in him come out. The church become born. The church become the bride of Christ. Listen, God's already got all this stuff figured out, church. I'm telling you, everything he done, he did for you and he did for me. Everything. But they just said, see, if he'd have just come down at the cross at that point, he would have never paid the price that he had to pay. He might have had a few people there in that day to look on him and believe on him, a few religious leaders, but that would have left you and I lost. That would still left us condemned without a Savior. But he just let them talk. He let them get there, he let them do what they wanted to do. Verse 4, and we get into something. 43. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God. In other words, they would just lay it on. They would just, that's exactly right, thicker and thicker. They were just laying it on to him more and more, because he said, verse 44. The thieves also which were crucified with him, thieves is a S, with an S there now, cast in him the same, or cast the same in his teeth. In other words, in the beginning, they both said the same thing. They both rejected it. In the beginning. But in all that was going on, I really believe probably the first thing, let's see where we're going to go. Let's go to Luke 23 for a minute, 23:33. So with everything I've just been telling you, I was leading up to a point. With everything they were going through, with all the accusations they were bringing against Jesus and everything they were doing. Go to verse 34 maybe. So everything Jesus just went through, he'd just been beaten. Before they put him on the cross. Maybe they beat him in, the 8 o'clock hour just before they hung him on the cross around 9. Somewhere in that time frame, punished him. But with all that Jesus went through, with all the people walking by and talking about him and calling names, everything that's going on in a situation like that, I believe this is the very first thing Jesus said on the cross. I believe that. You don't have to see it that way. He's hanging on the cross. And listen, and believe from every wide word he didn't die from blood loss. I don't know, but the most common death of crucifixion is suffocation, because you kind of have to lift up like that to breathe every time. But eventually you'll get where you won't be able to do that. You won't be able to raise your lungs, and you'll suffocate technically. It's really what happens. And it's a slow, painful death. They had fixed it. The Phoenicians, I believe, was the first one to use it, but the Romans, they had perfected it. They knew how many hours it would take. They knew the Sabbath was coming. They knew at 3 o'clock that afternoon. They had no idea Jesus had to die at 3 o'clock. They didn't know that. God did. That's just when they started to get ready to offer the evening sacrifice. God knew that, but they knew exactly what time to put him on the cross and what time he'd be dead. They had perfected it so well. But he's hanging and all this is going on and everybody walking by and everything he's seeing. And Jesus says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. You might not see that, but that's powerful words. You really might not see that. Think about your problem. Think about stuff you're going through. How we get angry with people. And I'll be honest with you, when I first come to Evergreen, I had some hard feelings for some people. I really did. But I was teaching this same lesson in a class back there the year before I started out here in the sanctuary. I was teaching in a class back there. I taught back there. I finished out a year for somebody, then done one more year, then they moved me out here. Jim, I was having a real problem with something. And it's the first time I really grasped what they said. Don't get me wrong. Now, I knew it was there from a child. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. I know it was there. There's a difference in just knowing something there and then really putting your mind, your thoughts to it. And really understand what Jesus is going through. And while I was teaching back there, this same text, God gave me peace with it, and it's never bothered me again. Because because the people that I had the hard feelings with, they really didn't know what they were doing. I believe that, in his family. But I really don't think they understood. I think they had good intentions, but they really didn't know what they didn't know what they were doing. But it's powerful work when Jesus is going through. I mean, minister, think about when you're the angriest now. Now, he weren't angry. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm talking about you. When you're the maddest at somebody for something's done, you're maddest. If you could just lift your hands and Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I mean, you said a lot. Jesus had every right to be angry. He done no sin. He done no wrong. I'm not saying he just was at all now, because he wasn't. He was dying because of my sins and your sins. But I'm just telling you, if we were in that saint, like the two thieves on the cross, one of them was angry. We'll see that in a little bit. One of them says, why are you doing him like that? He said, you and I deserve what we get. Don't you know, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. We get what we deserve, but he didn't deserve that. So one of them was just angry from the get-go, what I think, about the whole thing. And he was guilty. But if we could ever come to that, when people do us wrong, think about what Jesus did on the cross of Calvary. That's true forgiveness right there. He didn't just say it. He meant it. Do you not know Jesus went about, almost on a daily basis teaching to forgive forgive your trespasses, love your enemies, do good to those that spitefully you. The Bible's full of it, preacher. You preach it often, it's full of it. He didn't just say those things, and then when he got in a bad spot, just changed his thoughts. Even in the midst of the worst time of his life, hanging, he still said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And he was, you say, well, who was he talking about? All of them. The chief priest that was walking up and down and said, save yourself and we'll believe on you. The ones that spit on him. The one that drove the nails in his hand. The one that lifted him up on the cross. The one that's going to punch him in the side. I believe he's talking about all of them. Everybody that had took part in it. In whatever area they took part in. Whatever they done to him. The one that beat him. Until you wouldn't even been recognizable. Even that one, I believe, Jesus said, Father, forgive them. Listen to me. He didn't have to say those words to die for you and I. Not per se. He didn't he was still dying to say. Let me make that back up. I'm not saying he didn't. But let me put it like this right here. All the sacrifices that died before never said that. Let's put it like that. Because they couldn't say anything because they were animals. And they might have hollered, but they didn't holler, Father, forgive them like we. But he did that to show you no matter where you at in life, no matter what you're going through, no matter how bad anybody done you wrong, I don't care if it's family, I don't care if it's friend, foe, whoever, regardless of whoever, however they done you. You say, well, you know what they done to me. You're not thinking about what they done to Jesus. That's the problem. Because you can find a place in your heart to forgive people for what they've done. That's why Jesus said those things. Listen, there ain't nobody in here done you as bad as they done Jesus on the cross. I don't care who you are. I don't care what kind of, and I realize people have problems. I'm not saying that at all. I realize people have disagreements. I'm not saying none of that's not true. All that's true. But none of you has been put to the extreme to what Jesus is when he was hanging on the cross and what he went through. You're talking about a bad day. You want him to think about what a bad day is you faced the day that Jesus faced when he hung on that cross. And he was still able to say, Father, forgive them. They know not what to do. Listen, they're the ones that bought his garment. And it says they parted his raiment and cast lot. Listen, man, they didn't. I'm sure they heard him. The thief on the cross, maybe that's what won him over. The one that cast the same. Maybe that's what won him over when he seen all they were going through. He heard the accusations they were bringing against Jesus. He heard all those things. Maybe that's what convinced him when he was hanging there. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Love covereth a multitude of sins. Yes. You can forgive people and move on, but you got to be willing to. You got to be the one willing to. Listen, it's easy to harbor up and hold grudges. Trust me, I understand. Oh, yeah. It's easy, but it don't do nothing. You're really hurting your own self more than you're hurting the other person. True. You're hurting your own self. You'd be better to work it out and forgive me and get through it and get on back to a normal life. Because it won't do nothing but grow. And then it's going to affect your relationship with other people. And it just grows. That's all I can, that's the best way to know it. It grows. But I want to be able to be like Jesus, say, Father, forgive them. For they know not what they do. In my situation, I don't even think about it anymore. It's good. Everything's good. No problems. None whatsoever. If they called, I'd be there. That's not me. That's because God convicted me that you don't know what they did to my son. But my son still stood and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Well, I think it's the first thing Jesus said on the cross. You don't have to. Again, this is just to order it. I feel like that it might happen then. Let's see. Let's go to. Let's look on down in verse 39 right there in the same chapter. Now, sometime I don't know at what point. I don't know at what point that it was dark or when the other thief believed. Don't know. But at this point, something's happened in his talk. And he's beginning to see Jesus for who he is. I don't know if it's Father forgive them, don't know what to do, or by this time it's dark. The Bible's just not clear. Now, if you know something different, I'm all ears as far as to listen to what you've got to say. But it either has to be something like this, or either the fact that the darkness come in the middle of the day, and they didn't nobody have a recollection of that. They didn't know that could happen. I mean, that ought to be a sign, something to show that there's a God in the. I mean, listen, things just don't happen like that on coincidence. I know people say a lot of things coincidence, but it just ain't got dark in the middle of the day on a coincidence. You say, well, it was an eclipse. I'm not saying it wasn't a total eclipse. Maybe it was. Don't know. But what's the chances of it happening on the very moment, in the very hour that Jesus is going to die on the cross without divine intervention, without God himself planning it? I mean, on a gamble, they wouldn't be one in trillions and trillions of chances that would ever happen. That just shows the divine intervention of God, that God is in control. And however he chose to make it a total eclipse, or whatever he chose it to be, it happened exactly when he wanted it to happen. But whatever point was at this time, the thieves were there, and one of the malefactors, which were railed on him, saying, "If thou be Christ, save thyself and us." So one of them's angry. One of them said, "Well, if you're Christ, if you're what you say, if you're what you say you are, save us and you." Next verse. But the other answered and rebuked, saying, "Doest thou not fear God?" Now somehow or another he's changed from what we've seen in Matthew. He's changed. Saying, doeth not thou fear God? See that thou art in the same condemnation. He said, don't you fear God that you're in the same, you're condemned to die just like he is? Next verse, 41. And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. In other words, we're getting exactly what we deserved, is what he's saying. What one thief said, we're getting exactly what we deserve. But this man's done nothing amiss or nothing wrong. 42. And he said unto him, Jesus, Lord. Man, he's changed from saying what he said in the beginning. Now he said to him, Jesus, Lord. I mean, it's sure people make being saved complicated. People make being right with God complicated. You know, you got to do this, you got to do that. I mean, sometimes we make it complicated. He said, remember we when thou comest into thy kingdom. I mean, that's not complicated. That man somehow or other knew that Jesus was Lord, or he wouldn't have called him Lord. And he'd already said that this man had done nothing wrong, but we were getting what we deserved. That's a picture of salvation when people change from lost to saved. Right. You realize you're getting what you deserve, but you realize somebody else is paying a price for you. You realize the prices are, and this was happening at the same time. But he said, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom, verse 43. And I'm sure there's other words that we don't have, other parts of the conversation. Now, I really do believe the first thing that Jesus said is the Father forgive them, for they know what to do. But I really think the second thing, once Father forgive me. Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. I really believe it's the second thing Jesus said on the cross. When he's telling, hey, today you're going to be with me in paradise. Now, I don't want to get off on this because I can't prove it. Plus, it's not part of the lesson. But probably prior to Jesus dying on the cross, the Bible says that he went and set the captive free. So somewhere or another, wherever God's people were, they weren't in no torments or nothing like that, but they were in some type of holding. I can't put my finger. I can't tell you. I know exactly what. But some type of something, and that's why Jesus said when he went to set the captives free. So everybody had died prior to Jesus. They were in a place, and when Jesus left, he went and preached to them to set the captives free. And we'll get there later. That's why I come later after Jesus died. The dead walked through town, and appeared unto many. We'll get that not today. We'll get that at a later date. But prior to this, they went to a place like paradise. What it said, and it says, "Verily I say to you today, shalt thou be with me in paradise." Jesus was paying the price for my sins and your sins, and even while he was on, and the thief, this thief would have died. Jesus would have died first, and this thief would have died after. But Jesus, and the second thing I believe he said, "Today thou shalt be with me in paradise." What? 43. Let's jump on. Let's go to John 19:26. I'm not going to get. I thought I might get done with this today, but anyway, I'm not. Let's cover one more because that'll be almost half. Well, it won't be half, but I'm not trying to hurry through it. I feel like I don't know. I don't know. I just. I want you to understand. I really do. I know I've said probably a lot of things you know, but I really want you to understand what Jesus has really done, what he's really doing. John 19. Is that what I said? 1, 2, 3. John 19:26. John 19:26 and 27. So there was several women at the cross. We know there was 3 Marys. Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary, the wife of this one, and Mary, and Martha, Mary Magdalene. Anyway, there was 3 Marys that we know of that went to the cross. And they were there. You can imagine what Mary went through. She thought back, preacher, to the time when the angel gave her or told her she was going to have a child. She probably lacked a lot of understanding at this particular time. I bet this was an awful day for Mary. Let's put it like that. I mean, for God to come on the scene like he did and speak to her and give her a child the way he did supernaturally. I mean, Jesus was born of a virgin. I believe that no other way. And I'm sure if you've ever questioned God, I don't know that Mary didn't have a better reason for questioning God than what we could ever come up with. Yeah. You think about it. Put yourself in a human standpoint now. God's giving you something supernaturally because it was going to save your people. But when he's 33, 34 years old, he's hanging on a cross and he's dying. And has done nothing wrong. Never had a problem with him from the time he was a child. Think about it. Never had a problem with it. Done what it was told. Didn't talk back. Didn't argue. Just think about it. And knew more about God's word than the priest did at 12 years old when he was in the temple down there talking to him. If anybody ever had reason to question God, why is he there? If there's anybody ever had a reason, it'd be Mary. Think about it. If anybody, and I'm not saying it's right to question him ever, but I'm just telling you, if anybody had an excuse to question God, that's a perfect example right here. He's hanging on the cross. He looks down and he sees his mother standing at the cross. Now, we use the term woman in a different way than what it really means. Now, we'll say woman, jokingly, Mr. Leon, woman, go do this, woman, go, and we say it jokingly. I mean, I do too occasionally. But this was a really special title. Really lifted Mary up high in his eyes. Really, it would be a similarity like calling him a queen. It's similarity. I mean, that's not what it means now, but that just gives you an idea. In other words, it'd be really lifting him up really high. But this is maybe the third thing he says, woman, behold thy son. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple standing by whom he loved, he said unto his mother, woman, behold thy son. Now he's not talking about himself there when he says, behold thy son. The disciple whom he loved was John, as we know it, that's written, the Gospel of John in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd John in Revelation, the one that's Jesus' beloved disciple. Now, I've told you before, and that I told you I thought John was a really young man when he met Jesus, and I mean really young. I won't get back to that today, but I've told you that just. And John went in the castle with him that night. And John left at some point, but it was a short period of time because everybody disappears in this life, as far as the men, except for John. And John does too for a very short period of time. We've already covered that, if you remember. But he's hanging on the cross, and he looks at his mother, and he says, woman, behold thy son, talking about John. Next verse. Then saith he to the disciple. So he's not talking about him being the son. He says, behold, thy mother. Jesus dying on the cross, him being the oldest son, would have been his responsibility, probably no doubt, to take care of his mother and her needs as long as she would live. And although he was going to live, and was going to live forever after the crucifixion in a different way, he wanted to make sure his mother was taken care of. And so he charged John. He said, listen, more or less, John, or woman, behold thy son, behold thy mother. In other words, John was going to take that woman, Mary, back to his house and was going to care for her and meet her needs that she would have until the day she died. It was a charge that Jesus gave John, on the cross, and said, John is going to be your son. He's going to meet your needs. He's going to be there for you to do what I can do from now on. I mean, Jesus didn't leave anybody out. If you just got to study the Bible, you just got to look in there. I mean, none of us. He left none of us out. I mean, God had all of it planned. He knows what he's doing. He knows what's going on, what's happening. And it say from that hour, that disciple took her into his own home. And from that time, he took her to his house and he took care of her the rest of her life. I'm not done by a long shot, but I'm going to have to close because it's getting late. Anybody got a question or comment, something you want to say? I really thought I would get through these quick.
Well, I always, I don't know if I've read it in commentary, but I always thought about when he called a woman, it was not disrespectful.
Right.
But he said that because at that time, he was her son, but at that moment, he was her savior.
Right.
And therefore, he was not her son, he was her savior.
Right. Yeah. That's good too. I understand. Anybody else?
So we know he's hung on the cross for 6 hours, and this is just a thought. I told a preacher about it the other day, but did he hang there 6 hours, 6 minutes, and 6 seconds to prove to Satan? Just a thought. I mean,
Never,
there's no evidence
never
for
know,
that.
because we don't know. We don't know the exact minute. When it says about that. Now, you know what that means. That could be 30 minutes less or 30 minutes more. You know what I'm saying when it says that. You just don't ever know.
We are sick, and he died for us.
Very well possible. Never thought about it, but very well. Did y'all hear what he said? He said it could have been 6 hours, 6 minutes, and 6 seconds to cover man. If you didn't hear him at what he asked. Good question. Good thought.
Brother Jay, in verse 34, it's talking about that they gave vinegar and to drink mingled with gall. I know gall is bitter and stuff like that, and vinegar, I'm not sure if that was wine or. So my question is, were they giving him something to help him medicinally, help him with the pain, or were they just more of a torture technique to give him something, you're just dying of thirst and want something to drink, and you give him something so bitter that he can't drink it?
It was very bitter. Now, supposedly, and I taught this, and I'll say this quickly because the preacher's done looking at me. He remembered what I said. Me and him didn't see eye to eye on something. It weren't nothing big, just a small thing. That was probably something they would give him. I don't say the numb pain, but maybe the dull it just a little bit. Supposedly is what they say. But I asked a question. I talked to you, I don't know, 5 years or so ago. You don't remember? I was thinking you remember. About 5 years ago. You just come. Whenever you had just come. And I taught one Sunday that I asked a question: how many times did Jesus get? Were they offering on the cross? How many times did they offer him vinegar? And everybody said one time. I said, no, it's twice. And some of them were shaking their head. No. I said it's twice. So in one gospel, and when they very first hung him up there, and this was my whole lesson. The first time they hung him up there, when he said when he tasted, he wouldn't receive it, or he didn't drink it, and so he didn't. It would have been mixed with leaving, which would have made him ceremonially unclean to be able to die for our sins if he, because remember you had to clean all the leaven out, and wine's made from that. But when everything's said and done, in the very end, and everything's said and done, he receives it. I said that, and I said I believe he received it because that would have made him ceremonial unclean, which is where you and I come in, because we were never ceremonial clean to die as a Jew. None of us ever were. You wouldn't ever be. You're not a Jew. But when he took it in the end, that was my whole lesson last time when he took it. But he drank it at the very end when everything was said and done to draft you and I into this thing. That's just a thought. But it was something, all my studies, it's something that they give. It didn't kill pain like you could just drink a bunch up and kill pain, but it would maybe just dull it just a little bit. To take the edge off, maybe is a good way of putting it.
So your answer to that is they give it to him twice.
I think twice. They give it to him twice. First time he didn't take it in the very beginning. But in the very end, the last time. And you got to read all 4 Gospels now to get that. You just can't. You kind of have to.
Give it twice explains that.
And that's what.
He did, and he did.
Right. So that's my take on that. He felt all the effects of it to the end, and then maybe received it at the end. That's just my thoughts. Anybody else? I don't know if that answered your question. All right or not.
Basically, it was something to help him.
Yeah, just something, just to. Right. It was an awful death now. I mean, people die horrible deaths, I know, but I didn't tell you, I don't know of any I've seen that's worse than crucifixion. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
Brother Jay, the thief on the cross, when he was talking and he had his interaction with Jesus, you know, you look at it from, they said Jesus was in the middle, so we think about that one thief. I mean, where was he going to turn? You know, I mean, he was, naturally he wanted to come down, and that's a lot of times people, in order to
Right, right,
And this guy's hanging over the pits of hell, getting ready to go into eternity. And he sees it. I mean, he can't look to his left or to his right. One way he looks, he's gonna see nothing. The next way he looks, he's gonna see Jesus.
right,
So I believe that's partially what changed his mind in being saved. When you said Jesus told him today, he told him this to remember. And he told me he'd be with him in paradise. And I'm with the preacher on the Mary deal where he looked at her and called him woman.
Right.
Called her woman. I feel like that was Jesus looking down, I mean, he didn't call her mom or he didn't call her
right,
mom.
right,
He didn't even call her Mary. He could have called her either one of them.
Right.
But he referenced her as woman, and I believe that was his separation from her, that she needed to have a Savior just as much as anybody else.
right. That's right. That's right. Anybody else? If not, we'll pick back up here next Sunday, Lord willing, and keep going. May God bless you. We love you till then.